What if I told you that in this cartoon from 1988 lies the hidden truth about you and how the false god or the Matrix trapped your soul? If you didn't already know, let me tell you. Fairy tales were not made for children. Fairy tales are actually encrypted knowledge and encrypted history intended for those who know how to interpret them. The truth is hidden in fairy tales and it cannot be censored because most people won't be able to decode it. For them, it will just be a made-up story, while those who know how to interpret the hidden truth in fairy tales can use them to free their souls from the lies we are all submerged in, and to better understand their subconscious patterns that govern their life. The cartoon Felix in Another Dimension best describes the journey of enslavement, healing, and freeing the soul from the false god, or as we call it, persona. If you want to understand how the Matrix works and controls your life, how the persona, your false self, trapped your soul, and what you can do to reclaim your authority within your system, let's decode the hidden truth in the cartoon Felix in Another Dimension together. Understanding the soul, ego, and persona, as well as other mechanisms that make up the enslaved human being and their path to liberation, is portrayed in 15 scenes in this film. The location of the other dimension, how soul suppression works, the enslavement of the soul, consciousness and ego, the path the ego must take to begin the liberation process, confrontation with the lower astral plane, explanation of parallel dimensions, the circus, introduction to hungry ghosts and demons, how the logical mind deals with trauma, understanding the rules of Matrix, how incarnations work, framework of the lower astral realm, how to get to your soul, the birth of your persona, and the liberation of the soul. To understand the hidden symbolism, it is necessary to be familiar with the archetypes used in the fairy tales. I will explain the symbolism and archetypes as we go through the scenes in order. First, I will show you the scene and then I will decode it for you. So let's begin. The first scene begins with Felix telling us about his adventures in another dimension and that it cannot be reached by a plane. Before we decode this part, let me ask you an important question. If God gave you the task of advising him on where to hide secret knowledge, a knowledge that, when possessed by a person, would allow them to fulfill all their desires and goals, where would you suggest hiding it? Many might suggest hiding this knowledge on the peak of the highest mountain, at the bottom of the sea, or on an abandoned island full of poisonous and dangerous creatures. However, this would be a mistake. Why? Because there would always be at least one person who would over time find a way to reach that hidden treasure. So, where is the safest place to hide this treasure where most people would never look? The answer is simple: within us. The treasure is hidden within us because this is the place where most people would never think to look. This is the message of the first scene in this cartoon. The hidden message of this scene is that the dimension Felix is talking about is not physical in nature, but spiritual. He says that this dimension is not far away in a physical sense, but very close, meaning within us. From the introduction alone, we can conclude that the entire cartoon is actually a story about an inner journey that every person must undertake if they want to individualize. That is, free themselves from the unconscious chains that make them a slave to the persona, the false god, the false self. This is similar to a cartoon Alice in Wonderland, when Alice is running away from the queen and her guards, and when she reaches the door and asks to pass through it, the door tells her that she has already passed through it and shows her that in the physical world she is actually sleeping under the tree. So everything that follows and all the scenes I will decode for you relate to the inner world and inner work. The cartoon Felix in Another Dimension is full of symbolism and beautifully illustrates this inner journey that every person must undertake on their path to individualization. Second scene begins with the Minister Grumper expressing discontent over the princess raising the salaries of the people in the kingdom, arguing that she should not have done so Their conversation is interrupted by a woman who appears to be mad. Her name is Pearl, who informs them that the Duke is coming with an army of cubes and cylinders. Minister Grandpa tells the princess that she can escape through the Demands portal while he takes her place until she returns. Before I begin decoding the second scene, let's familiarize ourselves with the symbolism and archetypes present in old fairy tales. The princess represents the soul. In fairy tales, the soul is portrayed as a princess, gentle, naive and pure. Her name is Oriana, and the kingdom where she lives is also called Oriana. The meaning of the word Oriana is gold. The minister represents a part of the human psyche that psychologist Schwartz described as the manager. The role of the manager in the human system is to protect the exiles, in this case, the soul, which is about to be banished from the system. In addition to managers, there are firefighters, who step in when managers can no longer suppress the exiled part of the soul. When the soul is banished or suppressed, the managers take over temporarily, occupying the soul's place until it returns or heals. Now, what revealed that the Minister Grandpa is actually the manager? As you may have noticed, the minister immediately began calculating with soul and debating the allocation of money, and calculations are typical managerial behavior. I will explain Schwartz's psychology of exiles and protectors in more detail shortly, but let's continue the story. Pearl enters the scene and informs the soul that the evil Duke is coming with his army to conquer and subjugate the kingdom of Oriana and capture the princess. Notice how Pearl constantly mentions signs and indicators that such an event is inevitable. However, the soul, being naive, ignored the sign along the way, and now she will pay the price for it. Having disbanded the army, the soul has no means to defend the kingdom, and naively believes that the people will rise against the Duke and his army. Of course, the people did not rise against him. Instead, they fled in fear. So, who is Pearl in a symbolic sense? Pearl represents signs along the way that we humans, in our naivety, ignore daily. How many times have you ignored signs along the way? How many times have you experienced someone in your life showing you disrespect or engaging in toxic behavior, but you rationalized it by saying, well, they're not that bad. We've known each other for a long time, and they probably didn't mean it that way, only for that disrespect to later turn into betrayal, deceit, or something far worse. How many times have you maintained relationships with people who don't wish you well, just because you believe it's impolite to remove toxic individuals from your life? How many times have you felt heavy emotions, but continually swept them under the rug, rationalizing them by saying, oh, I'm fine, the anger I feel will pass, and I just need to cool off, or something similar. Naturally, the more you ignore your emotions, the more they accumulate within you, the more they will create chaos in your life. The minister advises the princess to escape through a secret passage that leads to the Demands portal, so that she can call for help from the only part that can protect her. He says the Duke won't harm him much, and this is true because the minister or manager is essential to the Duke for him to control the system. The princess lives with Pearl, and on the throne where the princess once sat, now sits the minister, who stands for manager, as we explained previously. And who is the Duke and his army of cubes and cylinders, from which the princess is fleeing? We'll discuss that later, but in the meantime, try to guess. Now you know that the princess is actually the anima, the immature soul. Pearl represents signs along the way that the unrefined, immature soul unconsciously ignores, and Minister Grandpa is the manager, a part of the defense mechanisms that takes place of the soul while it is suppressed. The princess flees through dark tunnels, while the minister takes her place on the royal throne. The army of cylinders and cubes breaks through from all sides. The princess barricades the door, but it is in vain. The army of cylinders and cubes manage to break through. This scene represents suppressed emotions and tensions that the soul has been ignoring all along. However, now that it can no longer ignore them, it must retreat into the dark parts of its subconscious. From all sides, suppressed content that the soul has avoided confronting for so long is closing in, and now the time has come to pay the price. The princess and Pearl reach the Demands portal, but it is unused, dusty, and has not been active for years. The princess tries to activate it, but it is too late. The cylinders arrive and capture the princess and Pearl. Before being taken away, the princess sheds a tear. The tear turns into gold and manages to pass through the Demands portal. As she is taken to the city of Zil, which will be discussed later, the Duke orders the path to the Demands portal to be sealed and explicitly commands that no one should ever reach the Demands portal ever again. Did you manage to figure out what the Duke symbolizes? The Duke symbolizes the false self, or persona, and his army, with which he conquers the kingdom of Oriana and enslaves Princess Oriana, consists of cubes and cylinders. Cubes and cylinders symbolize toxic, limiting programs and belief systems, without which the persona cannot exile the soul from the system and take control. What are programs? Programs are limitations imposed on us by other people, our environment, the education system, and media, such as life is hard, it's difficult to earn money, you have to step out of your comfort zone to succeed in life, it's impossible to find the ideal partner, and so on. In essence, anything that is not aligned with the truth is a program or belief system. If not addressed and removed in time, but instead infused with life energy, and each time you ignore them, you give them life energy, they become dangerous, gain strength, and take over your life. In this way, even though programs and beliefs have no power on their own and are not aligned with the truth, you give them life, and they, in return, create your reality. For example, if you believe that life is hard and that you must fight every day to be happy, you will indeed live such a life. The Demands portal symbolizes the ability of soul to connect with other dimension of the human psyche, or being. What are these parts? You'll find out later. When the soul is not connected with other parts of itself, it cannot manage the system, and it is then suppressed by toxic programs and the false self. For the tear to pass through the Demands portal, it must enter a code. Here, for the first time, we see the number 4. Remember this number, as it will reoccur throughout the cartoon, and its meaning is crucial to understand, because it does not appear by chance. Before we continue the story, I owe you Schwartz's explanation of how exiles and protectors function. According to Schwartz, when a person experiences trauma that they are not ready to process at the time, the mind fragments and an exile is created. A part of the soul or psyche is frozen or removed from the system. Managers and firefighters then take over to keep the system functioning. The role of managers is to manage the system while the soul is in exile, while firefighters step in to put out fires when managers can no longer maintain control. Firefighters serve to empty your emotions, so that you no longer have the energy to feel the emotions within you. Managers and firefighters come in various shapes or forms. I will give some broader examples, and you can introspect and ask yourself in which areas you had to suppress parts of yourself, what replaced your soul, and how you extinguish the fire or emptiness that you wake up and go to sleep with. Have you ever had a close person, a parent, someone you considered to be your best friend, someone you were in love with, someone who you had full trust, and have that person say to you, "You're too fat, you need to lose weight," or "You're too skinny, you need to gain weight, look at yourself, no one will want you." If this has happened to you, you felt hurt, and instead of processing the emotions of sadness, anger, rejection, loneliness, or feeling unloved, you suppressed parts of your soul. In its place, a manager emerged, saying, "I'll go to the gym, I'll work out regularly, I'll stick to a strict diet, I'll never skip workouts, I'll lose weight if I'm overweight, or I'll build muscles if I'm skinny. I'll attend health and nutrition seminars, I'll show everyone, I'll prove myself, and then others will love me." If you ever said this, it's not your soul speaking, it's the manager who has taken over your system in place of your exiled soul, which cannot handle the emotions it was experiencing and wasn't accepted as it is. Instead, it had to become something it is not. Since the soul cannot become something it is not, it is suppressed, and in its place comes a manager who can do so. However, what happens is that the emotions you experienced are still within you. The manager only distracts you from them, and the more you ignore these emotions and focus on external things, strengthening your manager, the stronger these emotions will become. until the manager can no longer suppress them. At that point, when the manager can no longer suppress these emotions, firefighters step in. Their role is to provide relief just enough for you to speak the emotions again, allowing the manager to continue his work. In this case, if your manager consistently tells you to go to the gym, stick to restricted diets, push yourself, and so on, when the firefighter takes over, you might binge on sweets and junk food. This will give you temporarily relief from such a life, making you feel exhausted and burying your emotions even deeper. Afterward, the manager will once again distract you from your emotions until you break again, and the cycle repeats. The specific thing about managers and firefighters is that if you allow them to take control of your system, you will constantly go in circles thinking you're making progress, while actually spinning in place and losing a significant amount of energy and time. Why? Because you're ignoring the primary emotions. You're not living a life guided by your soul. Instead, synthetic parts of you are in control. Your soul, or the exile, wants to reintegrate and return to the system, but you persistently avoid paying attention to it. The consequence of such a way of life is a significant loss of energy, time and money spent on strengthening synthetic parts of yourself. The same applies to your love life, professional life, and social life. How many times have you been rejected in social situations for being who you are, forcing you to put on a mask and work hard to hide your true self, in order to be accepted in society, at work, or in love? How many times have you abandoned yourself because you believed it was the only way to gain love and respect from others? Whenever you feel pain that you cannot process, a part of your soul is suppressed, and in its place comes a manager who substitutes for the soul while it is in exile. That's why you see the minister Grumper sitting on the throne, the place where the princess once sat. This scene symbolizes the manager taking control of the system, while the soul is suppressed into the subconscious. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that exercising and eating healthy are bad, nor that obesity or being underweight are good things. What I want to say is that you shouldn't exercise and eat healthy to prove your worth to others or to gain love in this way. You should do it for yourself. Your actions should be connected to you and what your soul desires. If you don't know how to process the emotions you have within you and let them pass through your nervous system, your action will always be tied to pleasing others, catering to the image they've created for you, and trying to win their approval. If you choose such a life, you will never be completely happy. You will consistently generate problems and focus on solving them, continuously suppressing emotions and in essence destroying your life. And your emotions are the reason you have problems in the first place. Summary of the roles and behaviors of managers, firefighters, and exiles. Managers. Philosophizing, toxic belief systems, thoughts, and emotions, redirecting attention to irrelevant things. Managerial behaviors, people-pleasing, perfectionism, caretaking, controlling self and others, excessive self-criticism, judging, worrying, achieving striving, passivity, pessimism, procrastination, numbing, shutting down, denial. Firefighters. Binge eating, addictions such as alcohol, drugs, sex, gaming, etc. Shopping, workaholism, scrolling on the phone, rage, affairs, self-harm, suicidal thoughts, fantasy, panic, anxiety, hypervigilance, cravings, digestive problems, exiles, shamed, dependency, emptiness, fearfulness, shyness, openness, helplessness, worthlessness, hurt, fragility, anger, sadness, powerlessness, guilt, overwhelm, and deadness or lifelessness. We will go through summary of the roles and behaviors of managers, firefighters, and exiles, and you might take a moment to think about how many of these behaviors you have in your life. So, to summarize, managers are there to create a narrative about why you shouldn't accept yourself as you are. They redirect your attention to irrelevant things and control your life through philosophies, beliefs, and programs. Firefighters are there to disable you from feeling your emotions and confronting them by draining the energy necessary to observe and face your emotions, that exiled part of your soul. They work together and, with combined efforts, prevent your soul from reintegrating into the system. Not because they are bad, but because this is a natural defense mechanism of your psyche, when it has no solution for the emotional tension and trauma coming from the external world. When you have toxic emotions within you and you don't process them, but allow them to persist, your soul must leave the system. To keep you from functioning, the mind creates managers and firefighters, parts of you that allow you to have a somewhat functional life. Now you know the basics of how the human psyche functions, how the soul is exiled from the system and what takes its place, and how this affects your daily life. Before continuing, it might be helpful to write down a list of about 10 situations or relationships in your life where you feel you're not fully showing your true self, but are hiding behind a mask to gain certain benefits because you're afraid that if you show your true self, you'll be rejected. Go through the list of behaviors of managers, firefighters, and exiles, and reflect on which of these behaviors you recognize in yourself. If you're more interested in the topic of exiles and protectors, I recommend the book No Bad Parts by Dr. Richard Schwartz. And if you want to release your toxic emotions and bring order to your internal system, take a look at the Soul Athlete Experience, linked in the profile description. It's an experience that has helped thousands of people, including myself, to reconcile conflicting parts of themselves, releasing the emotional baggage carried since childhood, and develop emotional intelligence and authenticity. Let's move on to the next scene, which tells us what we can do when the soul is suppressed from the system, and which part of us is the only one that can help bring the soul back to its rightful place. The golden tear passing through the defense portal symbolizes consciousness. Consciousness is something every person has, regardless of the fact that their soul is imprisoned. Consciousness is what the soul leaves for the ego, so that the ego can use it to free trapped soul. Of course, consciousness can be extinguished and lost if people regularly ignore it. The tear is transported into Felix's world. Felix is sleeping under a tree, but the tear wakes him up, and he tries to catch it. By following the tear, Felix encounters trouble and gets in difficult situations. Despite the troubles, he continues to follow it, wherever it may lead him. Two scientists enter the scene. They can see Felix behaving strangely, but cannot see the tear that Felix clearly sees. What do the scientists represent, and why can't they see the tear? Scientists represent the logical mind. The tear, as we mentioned, symbolizes consciousness or intuition. The logical mind cannot see consciousness because, as you've seen, consciousness or intuition requires you to follow it and walk paths that seem illogical or even a bit dangerous. Felix, as we said earlier, represents the ego. Notice that he carries a yellow bag with multiple X symbols on it. The yellow color symbolizes creativity. The symbol X represents something secret or hidden knowledge. Just as hidden treasures on map is marked with an X, this is a metaphor for the hidden knowledge Felix possesses. Felix follows the tear, even though it seemingly leads him into trouble and pulls him out of his comfort zone. The scientists want to obtain the hidden knowledge as well, but they don't realize that it can never be reached through logic alone. The scientists represent the logical mind, which is always in search of hidden knowledge, but understanding how this knowledge works is impossible through pure logic. The scientists also symbolize the left hemisphere of the brain, responsible for logical thinking and judgment, while the bag symbolizes the right hemisphere of the brain, which is responsible for creativity. As we can see, the left and right hemispheres of the brain are divided at the beginning, and the left hemisphere, or the logical mind, always lags behind the right hemisphere, or the intuitive creative mind, because at this stage of ego development, the union of the two is not possible. What is important is that the logical mind follows the creative mind all the time, even though it cannot understand where it is being led, and that is fine. The tear enters a hole and invites Felix to follow it. But before Felix can jump into the hole, he must outsmart 4 foxes that appear. He succeeds, and you'll notice once again the appearance of the number 4. The symbolism of Felix entering the hole is similar to Alice in Wonderland and represents entering the unknown inner world. You'll also notice that Alice was lying under a tree before she fell into the hole. Felix enters the narrow gold mine, and the first thing he encounters is a skull. He mocks it and comes across a sign that reads, "Danger, the immense portal. Enter at your own risk. I wouldn't if I were you." However, even though he says this, Felix is momentarily mesmerized by the gold surrounding him and begins to question the decision to continue following his consciousness. The gold mine and the gold within represent material possessions, the shiny object syndrome, or distractions that prevent us from hearing and following our consciousness or intuition. The skull at the beginning represents death, meaning that if we allow distractions and material, fleeting, shiny things to steal our attention, life will pass us by in meaninglessness. This is a path that does not lead to life, growth and development, but to meaningless death, wasted and forever lost time. Felix's hesitation between the gold and following his consciousness symbolizes the challenge every person faces in life. On one side, we have our consciousness and know what we should do. And on the other side, we have so many shiny distractions that we perceive as important because we were taught so by the environment in which we grew up. Who in their right mind would choose consciousness over so much gold? To follow our consciousness, to hear it and allow it to lead us where we need to go, we must resist this plague called the shiny object syndrome. Thus, this is one of the obstacles we need to overcome if we want to be one step closer to our soul. The door closes, Felix enters the elevator, and the tear commands the immense portal to take them to the kingdom of Oriana. The immense portal addresses Felix, welcomes him, and tells him that the princess needs his help. The tear disappears with words, "I've taken you as far as I could. Now you must go on your own." Remember when Morpheus in the Matrix takes Neo to the door but tells him,
"Trying to free your mind, Neo, but I can only show you the door. You're the one that has to walk through it."
The same message is given to Felix by the soul. Felix arrives at a bricked-up door that the Duke had ordered the cylinders to seal. He grabs a drill but doesn't have the strength to use it on the door. Instead, he ends up in a garbage truck. Felix tries to force his way through the door. He drills into the wall next to it, and the room floods with water filled with various creatures. The symbolism is as follows. Felix, as an unrefined ego, believes he can skip steps and achieve what he wants by force. This is not possible, and that's why he cannot move forward through the bricked-up wall. Why did he end up in the garbage truck? Simply put, when we don't process our emotional charges, but instead hold them in our bodies, they stagnate. Just as stagnant water becomes a swamp, emotions that stagnate turn into emotional garbage, which we will have to confront sooner or later. Felix drills into another wall, and the room fills with water and weird creatures. Water represents emotions, and the creatures within symbolize thoughts. We see fish that represent female breasts, and a creature lustfully running towards them, symbolizing lust and lustful thoughts. If we want to move forward and live a fulfilling life, we cannot succumb to base desires and weaknesses we carry within us, which we've acquired throughout life. These we must overcome. Afterwards, a large fish appears, chasing Felix. It symbolizes fears. Let us remember the wise words of Lao Tzu. A step forward sometimes looks like a step backward. Before Felix can move forward to save the soul, he first must take a step back and confront his thoughts, emotions, fears, and weaknesses that he carries within himself at that moment. His emotional garbage, represented by the garbage truck in the background. If you want to dig deep, become aware of it and free yourself from the emotional garbage you carry, I recommend going through the Soul Athlete experience linked in the profile description. It has helped me and thousands of others transform the emotional swamp within us into a clear, flowing river. Once Felix managed to bring order to his thoughts, emotions, fears, and weaknesses, Felix or the ego is ready to continue his inner journey and transition to the next level of existence, the lower astral plane. Felix is put out into a swamp, where he encounters Pim, who introduces himself as a guide. Pim tells Felix that he won't be able to navigate this world without his help, and that it's best for him to follow Pim into, quote, civilization. We see that Pim, like the scientists, is also interested in Felix's bag. Felix notices strange creatures following them, but doesn't know what they represent. Pim explains that the creatures are harmless while they sleep in the trees, but when they mature, they consume everything that sticks to them. Notice that Felix briefly mistook Pim's lantern for the tear, or the princess. Finally, they arrive at a city, which Pim calls City of Progress, claiming it's the only city in these parts. We see that the city Pim describes is low vibrational. But why does Pim call it the City of Progress? Because in the demonic world, the lower astral, the rule of inversion applies. Everything bad is considered good, and everything good is considered bad. This is the rule of the lower astral or lower consciousness. Although Felix trusted Pim, Pim betrayed him and had been leading him into a trap all along. Pim throws Felix into a swamp, traps him in a plant-like creature, steals his magical bag, and sends him to a circus. The symbolism of this scene is as follows. We said that the swamp and the entire city of Zil represent the lower astral realm. Remember that Felix thought Pim's lantern was the tear he had been following to the Demence portal. Pim, or the lantern, is indeed a guide, just like the tear. But where does this guide come from? It comes from the lower astral. Although it shines, it is not pure and golden like the princess's tear, aka consciousness that the soul gave to the ego. And although it shines like the tear, notice that it did not lead Felix to a good place, but on the contrary, into slavery. Just as the soul gives the ego consciousness, the persona also gives the ego a guide. But such a guide always leads us into trouble, even if it doesn't seem that way at first. Pim seemingly helped Felix to find his way, guiding him temporarily before betraying and trapping him. How many times have you had situations in life where someone offered you something that pleased your persona? You bought that thing or achieved a goal set by your persona, followed that lantern, but in the end still felt empty despite achieving that goal. Notice that while Felix follows Pin, jellyfish jump out from all sides, lurking. This symbolizes that when you listen to false intuition, signs will appear along the way, and if you don't know how to interpret them, they will ruin you. How many times have you attended a seminar, listened to various speakers who told you things that might make sense, might sound logical, but weren't true? How many times have you heard a story that pleased your persona and your base desires? For example, in the dating world, if you're a man, you've heard it's natural for you to date multiple women, and all you need to do is buy their course to learn how. In the financial world, there's something called the cult of the megachurches, whose motto is God wants you to be rich. Of course, all they achieve is enriching themselves while others constantly give money and never manage to increase their income. How many times have you heard that you need to buy the most expensive car because it will elevate your social status and give you more comfortable life? When insecure people hear these things, they receive validation for their poor state while simultaneously feeling empowered, thinking they can improve their lives by becoming rich, having women or men swan over them, gaining many friends, and having the whole world admire the lifestyle. Using manipulative techniques and tactics, emotions are triggered in people, and they interpret those emotions as a sign from their soul pushing them to be better, bigger, faster, and stronger. Of course, this is false conscious, coming from the lower astral. as it always leads to slavery, endless purchases of things we don't need, wasting time, energy and money on various self-development seminars, overpriced supplements, techniques, etc. To master your emotions, you need to experience them and allow them to pass through you. I managed to do so through the Soul Athlete experience, and I suggest you try it as well. The link is in the profile description. Mastering your emotions is a key skill in the era we live in, because if we don't master this aspect, other people will control our emotions. And will think the emotions we feel aren't the result of marketing techniques, strategies and tactics, but rather our own intuition guiding us. This scene precisely explains how false conscious or intuition from the lower astral functions. The younger scientist, Dexter, sees through his device that Felix is somewhere nearby. The uncle wants to give up on the search, but the younger one points out a sign, the Great Anaero Mind, and explains that when read backwards, it spells Oriana. Oriana is a legendary kingdom that exists in another dimension. On the screen, we see that Felix is trapped, and for the first time we encounter demons, entities and hungry ghosts. The older scientists realize that Felix managed to get through a Demence portal and wonders what that is. Dexter replies,
Parallel dimensions, of course. Two worlds existing at the same time in the same space, on the same planet, but on a different plane.
They enter the machine and again notice the number 4. 4 buttons are being pressed for activation, and it takes them to the Demence portal. The symbolism of this scene is as follows. The scene with the word Anaero, which actually means Oriana backwards, symbolizes that the truth is often hidden from us at plain sight, but not for those who know how to decipher it. Thus, we can understand that Anaero, when read backwards, is Oriana, meaning it is indeed a gold mine, but not a literal gold mine with physical gold, it is a spiritual gold mine. The parallel dimensions Dexter talks about are different levels of existence. As he said, two worlds exist simultaneously, in the same space, on the same planet, but not different level of existence. People often wonder if parallel dimensions exist, and if we can exist in different places at the same time. The answer is yes, but not as different persons. You cannot encounter another version of yourself living in a parallel dimension and talk to it because it is all you, it's not someone else. So how many worlds exist? Worlds or levels of existence can be categorized into 3 levels. The physical world, the world of thoughts, and the world of emotions. In other words, while you are in physical world, you simultaneously exist in the world of thoughts and emotions. We will delve deeper into these worlds a bit later, but the only thing I want you to remember about parallel dimensions is that they exist simultaneously, and that you can influence them by your decisions, just as they influence you, even if you are unaware of their existence or how to manage them, your thoughts and your emotions. And if you don't know this, others who do will manage your thoughts and emotions. The consequence of this is that you will make decisions in life thinking they are your own, but you won't even realize that someone externally has implanted thoughts and emotions in you to influence you to make a certain decision, whether it concerns your love life, relationships, career, health, etc. That is all on this for now. Felix is tied with a rope, and Pim teases him with questions: how do you like the City of Progress? Everyone throws rotten fruit at Felix. In this scene, we are introduced for the first time to the inhabitants of the lower astral plane. Demons, low vibrational entities, and their overseer, another manager, Vyncke, whom Pim serves. In Christianity, these entities are called demons. In other cultures, like Taoism, they are referred to as hungry ghosts. Their characteristics are that they have large stomachs and small necks in proportion to their bodies. No matter how much food or energy they consume, they are always hungry. That is why they are called hungry ghosts in Taoism. Pim tries to impress Vyncke with a magical bag or secret knowledge, but no one from the lower astral plane except Felix, the ego, can use that knowledge. When Vyncke sends Pim to the flea pit, Pim tells him that the cat and the bag can bring in a lot of money. This is the first thing we see that Vyncke values. In the lower astral plane, the currency is money, rather than higher values like honor, honesty, morality, etc. Vyncke constantly humiliates Pym and does not see his spiritual value, viewing him solely as a lower being. Vyncke is the overseer of the Hungry Ghost, the chief jailer, and he helps the Duke, the persona, in imprisoning the soul. He refers to the managers we mentioned earlier, as Vyncke is one of those managers. And as we said, the persona cannot function without the support of managers. We can see how the logical mind struggles with subconscious problems that emerge. The scientists in the swamp are attacked by a monster. The monster wants to eat them. From a certain perspective, the monster looks like a cat. Dexter uses a shrinking weapon and throws a life ring so the monster doesn't drown. Only when the monster shrank did Dexter say,
Anyway, the shrinking process is only temporary.
Thus the logical mind cannot resolve any problems, but what it can do is rationalize the problems and temporarily reduce them. The reason why the monster looks like a cat from a certain perspective is that the monster represents Felix, or the ego of the lower astral plane. Just as there is conscious from the lower astral, there is also an ego from the lower astral, which is unrefined and aggressive. In other words, it is the shadow of the ego. Even now, you can see that in this world, lower astral, everything has its replica. Conscious has false conscious. The ego has an unrefined ego. The soul has a persona. The manager has another manager. The kingdom of Oriana has its replica, the city of Zil, which is called the city of progress or civilization, and we know that all of this is the opposite of progress and civilization. From this scene, we can observe that Felix is unaware of the rules of the lower astral plane and believes that his bag, his hidden knowledge, can help him fight against the hungry spirits. Unfortunately for him, he realizes that this knowledge is of no use in this world. This is why he receives his first lesson. If you want to eat, you have to work. Felix introduces himself and says he works for no one. Independence does not exist in the lower astral plane. This is why Vyncke laughs, because Felix does not understand the rules of the world he is in. Reflect on your own life. How many times have you tried to achieve independence, but kept hitting a wall? Whether it's independence in work, living in nature, financial independence, independence in relationships, love, or friendships. As long as you are emotionally residing in the space of the lower astral, which is low vibrational by its nature, it is impossible for you to have freedom and independence. Vyncke throws Felix into a cell. There Felix meets the Mizzards, which are a mix of mice and lizards. That's how he called them. The Mizzards represent the law of polarization, which Felix must master if he wants to escape the lower astral realm. In the next scene, I will explain the law of polarization and the mechanisms by which it operates. Vyncke's announcement shows who is in charge in the lower astral plane. It is the persona, or the Duke. He states that they should be grateful to him because thanks to him, they will be able to inhabit Oriana, the place where the soul resides. This signifies that when the persona rules over a person instead of the soul, beings from the lower astral plane also inhabit the system in which the person exists, their body. We are introduced to the Zillians, or reptilians. In Christianity, they are called demons, and in Taoism, they are called hungry ghosts. We can notice several traits about them. They are all dirty, of low intelligence, and the only thing they care about is entertainment. Do you recognize yourself or people around you behaving this way? When you look at our civilization, it's easy to conclude that most people truly live like this, because these low vibrational beings from the lower astral plane have inhabited their system. Songs are playing, musicians are imprisoned, which represents the music industry. I might make a video about the music industry in the future, but I believe you all know what happens in this industry. and how the lyrics of many of our favorite songs are filled with low vibrational destruction, self-destruction, anxiety, neurosis, etc. You can verify this yourself by carefully reading and listening to the lyrics of popular songs. This song highlights that everyone recognizes the persona as the leader. They are trapped, but they are content because they are in their comfort zone with an entertainment program. And the main leader never loses anything because all the energy flows to him. Notice the dancing mice. They represent polarization. See how they constantly switch, how they fight each other. When one is not dancing, the other is, and vice versa. As promised, I will explain the law of polarization in this scene. The law of polarization is also called the seesaw law because it creates the illusion of progress, while hiding the truth that a person is not advancing but merely seesawing in place. Whenever you feel good or bad, these are two sides of the same coin. One is not better than the other. Emotions are emotions. The fact that we interpret positive emotions like joy, happiness and peace as good, while sadness, hatred, anger and rage are seen as bad because they feel unpleasant, is entirely subjective. How many times have you achieved success? Whether it's better position at work, more sales in your business, or establishing a romantic connection with a dream partner. Enjoying positive emotions only for everything to turn around and lead to a fall. Slowly, you start experiencing failure after failure at work. Problems in your family or relationships emerge, you experience stagnation in sales, and you feel frustration and immense stress. However, after some time, you start achieving success once again at work, find a new partner and feel joy once more, only for the cycle to repeat itself. It's crucial to understand that both good and bad states are temporary. If you don't master this law, your entire life will pass in their alternation, making you think you're moving forward, when in fact you're just seesawing in place. You are neither truly succeeding nor failing in life, you are merely stagnating. And if we observe success from an objective perspective, stagnation is failure, even though the seesaw creates the illusion of success and movement. When you master this law, you'll be able to step off the seesaw and truly begin moving forward. When the two polarities, positive and negative, are integrated, you become free from this law and learn how to manage it. The Soul Athlete experience can help you with this. Stop seesawing and enter a state of creation. Remember, a coin doesn't have just two sides as commonly believed. It also has an edge, but it is precisely this middle path that allows you to create prosperity in life. 4 mice emerge from the hat again. Notice the number 4. I want you to remember this number, because I will explain its symbolism at the end. And understanding this is crucial. The number 4 does not appear randomly throughout this cartoon. Felix entertains the audience, and in return he will be allowed to watch the princess dance. Everyone watches the princess dance in a bubble. The bubble represents incarnations, in which the soul is trapped. As you can see, while the unconscious soul dances in its incarnations, everyone mocks it and laughs at it. It entertains the beings from the lower astral plane. In this image, you can see a symbolic depiction of an Indian god Vishnu lying and dreaming. The dreams are depicted as bubbles, representing his incarnations. That's why the soul is shown dancing in a bubble. It represents incarnations. The soul is separated from the ego, from intuition, the signs along the path, and lives life completely unconsciously. For the first time we get an answer from the Duke, hinting at why he hates the soul so much and wants to torment it. So who is the soul's father? The soul's father is of course God, the true God from whom the soul originates. The reason the persona hates the true God is that it lacks the ability to create. As Tolkien says in his book The Lord of the Rings, evil cannot create anything new, it can only corrupt and ruin what good forces have invented or made. The symbolism here is that one life has ended, and now it's time to change or switch bodies and prepare for a new incarnation. Notice that when the soul is unconscious, it cannot recognize the savior who appears to her. Felix then explains to Pym, who believes there is no escape from this world, that he is not happy there and that Pym should help him find a way out. The scientists managed to infiltrate the city of Zil. They don't call the city of progress, but instead refer to it as the stink city. They notice that the buildings are designed to trap smoke and pollution rather than allowing the smoke to escape outside. They encounter a being from the lower astral plane that is completely unconscious and maintains this state of unconsciousness by drinking. You might think that a city that traps pollution isn't an advanced city. But remember, this isn't a real city, it symbolizes our inner world. In other words, a city that traps smoke instead of releasing it is a reference to us, just as most people don't release their thoughts, emotions, traumas and fears, but rather carry it in their bodies. Thoughts and emotions are not meant to stay within us, for us to hold on to. They are meant to pass through us. However, just as low vibrational beings trap smoke and keep themselves in a constant state of unconsciousness by consuming alcohol, people behave in the same way. When people don't maintain their emotional hygiene, they literally turn their inner world, which should be Oriana, the kingdom of light, into the low vibrational city of Zil, referred to as the stink city. Just as a person who doesn't bathe starts to smell bad, a person who doesn't cleanse their emotions and holds them in their body harms all their internal organs on a physical level. And you'll agree that no one likes to be in the company of a neurotic and anxious person, just as no one likes to be around someone who smells bad. The scientists press 4 buttons on the machine that help them get there. Again, number 4 appears. Felix pretends to be asleep while the Mizzard try to steal his reward. The Mizzards fall into a trap, and Felix catches them. They are terrified that Felix will eat them. After Felix reassures them that he won't eat them, he gives them food and asks how they got into his cell. They respond that they entered through holes. Felix doesn't understand where the holes in his cell came from, but as soon as the Mizzards remove the veil covering the holes, it becomes clear to Felix. This scene teaches us that whenever we find ourselves in situations that seem hopeless, there is always a way out. However, the exit is often invisible because we are too focused on the problem we are currently facing. Only when we can relax, we can see the solutions that are right in front of us. The holes lead to other cells, and Felix wants a path to be made for him so he can pass through it as well. The Mizzards tell him that they can dig through ordinary vaults, but not the outer ones, as they are made of steel. This suits Felix because he wants to visit the princess. After Felix passes through the first hole, he encounters his first neighbors: a rhino sleeping on a rope, a walrus in a water trough, and a groundhog. The Mizzards dig another passage for him, where he encounters 4 small animals. They're deeply asleep, and their snoring pulls Felix in and blows him out. Felix crawls and passes through the third passage. There he finds the princess sleeping. The symbolism of this scene is as follows. This scene symbolizes the path the ego must take and the mental obstacles it must overcome to establish contact with the soul. It can also be interpreted as journey to mastering astral projection. We see the rhino, who's enormous and balancing on a thin rope. The rhinos represents thoughts that constantly distracts us in every possible way. Just as it is impossible for a rhino to balance on a rope, so too do many impossible and unrealistic stories pass through our minds daily, which are nothing more than distractions. The walrus spitting water represents emotions that overwhelm us daily. Water symbolizes emotions. If we allow emotions to control our lives, if we make decisions while they overwhelm us, we will lose contact with our soul and drown in the illusion they create. We will lose time, energy and money that we will never be able to recover, all because we don't know how to manage our emotions. The groundhog that collapses represents entering the delta state of sleep, a state of unconscious sleep. You've likely experienced this if you ever try to practice astral projection. You lie in bed, thoughts and emotions overwhelm you, and then, once they exhaust you, you simply shut down and disappear. Only when you wake up do you realize you can't remember the exact moment you fell asleep and entered the dream state. After overcoming the first obstacle, Felix reaches the second cell, where 4 sleeping animals await him. While it's unclear for me what they are, their effect on Felix is what matters. They sleep, but attract him with their inhale and blow him with their exhale. To reach the princess or the soul, Felix must pass through this. Again we see the number 4, and the effect these animals have on him represent distractions. Look at the modern world. We are surrounded by distractions pulling us in every direction. TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, X, endless streams of information and content, all demanding our attention. In the context of astral projection, these 4 animals represent the vibrational state everyone must pass through to consciously step onto the other side. You've probably experienced these sensations at least once in your life. It's happened to me several times. I lay in bed and suddenly I start hearing sounds and feeling sensation in my head as if someone is stretching, blowing and pulling me. If you experience something similar, share your experiences in the comments, so I know I'm not the only one. After Felix overcomes this, he finally reaches the sleeping princess, or the sleeping soul. When Felix offers the princess a way to escape this world, the princess again believes that Felix is one of the Duke's instruments, and tells him to step aside, saying she has tried to leave this place, but has never succeeded. Felix reminds her of the tear she left, and the princess looks at him in surprise, calling him a dark stranger. Why is Felix a dark stranger? We said that Felix represents the cultivated ego, and for the ego to be cultivated and functional, it must go through the phase of shadow integration. Therefore, Felix can also be seen as the shadow that each of us ignores whenever it appears, as we see the princess doing multiple times in this story. After planning their escape, Felix asks to learn how the princess or the soul ended up in such a place. How was she enslaved? This conversation is overheard by Pim. What follows is the story of the false god spoken of by the Gnostics, the so-called Demiurge, and how he took control over humanity. In the next scene, we see the uncle and Minister Grumper before he became a minister, creating cylinders. The uncle is jealous of the princess's father and believes he should be the ruler of the kingdom, not the princess's father. The cylinder he worked on was supposed to replace humans and revolutionize forced labor. However, the cylinders exploded and destroyed the uncle's body, but he managed to restore it using scientific knowledge. The princess's father gave her the secrets of time and dimensional travel, as well as the location of a book containing the ultimate power, a book the Duke desperately wants to possess. Because of his actions, the Duke was exiled to the Valley of Zil, also known as the Dead End. There he was greeted by reptilian creatures who took him as their deity and submitted to his will. They believed he was there to help them, but the only thing he cared about was returning to Oriana and seeking revenge. He forced them to work and created an army of cylinders and cubes to get him out of the Dead End, of the land of Zil. The Duke slowly gathered strength and captured the princess, as her father had feared. The princess says she fears for her kingdom as its time is running out. Felix promises to rescue her and returns to his cell. There he finds Pim, who says he's had enough of being bossed around. After hearing the princess's story, Pim realizes that there's hope for him too to escape the Valley of Zil. Symbolism of this scene is as follows. As we've already said, this represents the enslavement of the soul by the false god known as Demiurge in Gnostic teaching. However, in my interpretation, I won't focus on the Gnostic literal belief that humanity is enslaved by some external false god, and that planet Earth is essentially a prison for souls. Instead, I will rely on an internal interpretation, which, when understood, can free a person from this slavery. The false god in this context is the persona. Another reference here is Lucifer, who was the brightest angel and believed he should be God instead of the creator who made him. Because of this, he harmed himself, just as the Duke harmed himself in attempt to overthrow the princess's father. The princess's father, or the father of the soul, is God, the creator of all. The dimensional travel given to the soul by gods refers to the vehicles of consciousness that every human possesses but does not use. As you can see in the image, there are multiple bodies, the etheric, astral, mental, and causal bodies. However, remember that in the beginning the princess didn't use the Demen's portal, symbolizing she was not connected to her vehicles of consciousness. And when she finally tried to use it, it was too late. The persona or the false god had already captured her, since the soul ignored the signs along the way and didn't use the knowledge given by her father, and suppressed negative emotions. The duke or the persona had enough time to use all these unprocessed thoughts and emotions to create cylinders and cubes representing toxic programs and beliefs, and thus take over the kingdom, aka the body, and populate it with low vibrational beings, lower astral plane. When the princess says her kingdom's time is running out, this refers to the fact that the entire system, meaning the body and spirit of a person, will be lost if the person does not address their inner contents, emotions, programs, and beliefs. A person remains a person as long as they have conscious and a soul. When a person loses this, and the persona with its toxic programs and beliefs takes their place, the person ceases to exist, and their life is controlled by low vibrational entities from the lower astral. Look at the people around you and judge for yourself how high vibrational they are, how much soul they carry within them versus how much of their soul has been pushed out. We may have lost a few battles so far, but there's still a chance to win the war. Now we move on to the next and final scene, where we'll learn how to defeat the persona, its programs, and how the soul can reclaim the leadership role it is meant to have. The scientists disguised themselves as Zillions and arrive at the reception. They need to pay, but the older scientist doesn't know what the payment should be. The younger scientist notices what is required. Payment is made with whatever is most valuable to the person at the moment. In their case, it's pliers. Everyone takes their place. Vyncke announces the performance. Felix made a deal with the musical band to help them escape. He entertains the audience and they want more. Vyncke demands more from him, but Felix insists on playing music while the princess dances because he knows the kind of music she loves to dance to. The princess begins the dance in a bubble, symbolizing a new incarnation, but this time Felix is there to help her. While the soul dances, living a new life filled with suffering, the duke enjoys her pain and mocks her. Felix starts producing special bubbles with his flute. Pim, Felix, and the Mizzards enter this bubble, while the princess is placed in a special bubble reinforced by Felix's magical bag, which cannot be pierced like other bubbles. Her new incarnation is strengthened by secret knowledge, and it is this knowledge that allows them all to ascend to a higher level of existence. Although Vyncke grabs onto a bubble, he cannot escape the circus and is pulled back to where he came from. The ascent of the bubble symbolizes the release of heavy emotions that had been keeping them trapped in the lower astral plane. When you feel anger, sadness, hatred, envy or jealousy, these are all heavy emotions. The only reason you cannot rise to a higher level of existence in your business, society or relationships is that you allow these heavy emotions to keep you in the circus of the lower astral. This is why every new job, relationship or social circle feels like the previous one. Even though the actors have changed, the essence remains the same. The essence being that your consciousness or soul is trapped in the lower astral. As long as you seek to create or find something new from this field, whatever you create will carry heaviness and will never bring you peace or fulfillment. Notice that although Vyncke grabbed onto a bubble, he couldn't ascend with them. Ask yourself why that is. It's because he is low vibrational, as you can see. He is nervous, sloppy, unkept, full of anger and malice. It's precisely his emotions that prevent him from ascending to higher levels. We see the Duke agitated because the soul is beginning to rise to higher levels of consciousness and existence. For the first time, we see how dependent he is on the cylinders he created. When he falls from his chair, he literally cannot get up without their help. He cannot get up on his own. In the final scene, we see Vyncke's magical staff pierce the bubble containing the Mizzards, causing them to fall into the bag, and the circus collapses. Now Felix, the princess and Pim are united and must escape Zil. The Duke curses Vyncke and orders all exits to be sealed. Felix realizes he left his bag in the circus, but the princess tells him he no longer needs it because they are united. They all manage to leave Zil and find themselves in a beautiful territory, free of stench, darkness, smoke, pollution, and low vibrational beings. Now there is only nature. The scientists reunite with Felix and his team and bring back Felix's bag. They lie saying they took it to return it to him, but in reality they took it for themselves. However, what they don't know is that the bag only listens to Felix, and he summons it back to him with a whistle. The paths are crystallized, but the passage they wish to take is blocked by a dragon approaching them. Now everyone is together: Felix, the princess, the two scientists, and Pim. And symbolism of this is the soul, the cultivated ego, the logical mind, and the cultivated conscious. Together they enter a cave. They have left the lower astral, gathered as one, and it is now time to ascend to the next level of existence and master it, the higher astral. You're probably wondering, how do I know they've reached the higher astral? Well, let's take a closer look. In the next scene, we see them exiting the cave. However, if you look closely, you'll notice that the cave they're leaving resembles a human face. Here are the eyes, the nose, and the mouth, and the cheeks. The cylinders and cubes are on their heels, and it's up to Felix to decide which path they should take. Ahead of them lies a forest inhabited by beings known as headhunters. This path is dangerous but shorter. There's also another path, a detour, but if they choose it, they might not reach the kingdom of Oriana in time, and it's unclear what dangers the detour might hold. Felix decides to take the forest route, and everyone follows him. Notice that Felix, the cultivated ego, leads the soul, not the princess or the logical mind. Are not leaders. Felix is. Heads begin to hover around them, and we see the headhunters throwing spears at them. We also notice that the headhunters have a snake coiled around their waists, which no one is holding. No matter how hard the headhunters try to capture the heads keep flying away. The heads want to wear hats, and without heads they cannot settle. Felix notices that and creates heads from his magical bag, satisfying the heads and allowing the group to move forward. Notice that the headhunters thank them in the end, waving their hats at the group. Also notice that everyone is holding the snake by its head. The heads represent authority, the establishment of control and power. And who are the headhunters? They are parts of ourselves that seek guidance and demand authority over them. And who must establish authority over them for the human psyche to be functional, cultivated, and for a person to achieve individuation? Of course, the ego, Felix. Parts of our psyche are not our enemies, even if it sometimes seems that way. Simply put, when you have conflicting parts of yourself, it becomes difficult to move through life. Here's an example. How many times have you wanted to change jobs, but a voice inside you convinced you to stay at the job you dislike because it provides a secure paycheck? These are your identities. They are in conflict and make decision making harder for you. Until you bring your identities into order, each will pull in its own direction, leaving you indecisive and lacking the clarity needed to make decisions and live life from a place of peace. When you go to work, you will work, but a part of you will tell you that perhaps you should use some rest. When you start resting, another part of you will push you to work and won't allow you to relax. You will constantly be thinking about how much work you might be able to do instead of relaxing. These are all examples of conflicting identities. These parts are necessary for us to fulfill different roles in society. For example, we need parts or identities such as father, mother, brother, colleague, or lover, and other identities. However, these parts must never take the lead in our system. All of them must be controlled by the cultivated ego. Every goal you set will be much harder to achieve, and you lose far more energy than necessary, not because you are incapable of achieving it, but because you have conflicts between inner identities, over which you haven't established authority. Felix, representing the cultivated ego, must establish authority over all identities and be the primary leader, and he has done so. The scientist accidentally pushes them on the cliff and they fall into a swamp. Pim doesn't fall with them but comes for them in a boat with a lantern. Remember the first time Felix saw Pim's lantern? Felix thought it was similar to Tyr he followed, which led him into slavery. But this time, Pim's lantern is no longer a corrupted guide from the lower astral. Now it is purified and represents salvation. So only after they've gone through everything they've experienced does the inner voice, represented by Pim and his lantern, become trustworthy, even though it wasn't at the beginning. They return to Oriana City through secret passages. The entire city is crystallized, filled with cubes, cylinders, and dust. The reason the author portrays the kingdom as crystallized is that when you lose contact with your vehicles of consciousness, your body, thoughts, and emotions, when you don't process emotions, contractions form in your body. These are depicted as crystals because they are hardened emotions and thoughts waiting to be melted and processed through your system. They don't want to stay there, but without your help, they cannot leave. Felix turns the bag into a rope and tries to attack the Duke, but fails, and everyone is captured. The Duke demands the book from the princess. She refuses and he threatens to harm the others, so she agrees to give him the book. The Duke finally gets the book containing the secrets of ultimate power. The princess hands the book to the Duke. When the Duke opens it, it reads truth, love, wisdom. This is the secret of the ultimate power. The Duke believes they are mocking him and joking him because these are not values he holds dear. He cannot believe what he is reading and releases the largest cylinder he has ever created to destroy them all. Felix throws the book at him, the cylinder shatters, and with it all the smaller cylinders and cubes. The Duke is finally defeated. The room is no longer crystallized. Life and joy return to kingdom, and the room becomes golden again. From this scene, we see how the persona cannot receive true power and how true power is hidden from the persona. Even when the persona sees it and holds it in its hands, it cannot recognize or value it. Values such as truth, love, and wisdom are foreign to the persona, which sees no power or value in them. At the beginning of the video, I asked you how you would advise God where to hide secret knowledge. Now I ask you to put yourself in the position of a God who has a child that one day needs to become powerful and independent. What values should your child have for you to be confident enough to pass that power to your child? These are precisely the values mentioned above. Truth, because if you do not communicate with the truthful knowledge, false knowledge will lead you to ruin or in persona's hands. Love, because if your actions are not aligned with love for yourself and the entire world around you, you will then be a destructive force on this planet. If you are that, you are not worthy of receiving the highest knowledge and the power that comes with it. And finally, wisdom, which is born from truth and love. Remember Nikola Tesla's words: if you knew the magnificence of the numbers 3, 6, and 9, you would have the key to the universe. Truth, love, and wisdom are the things that will allow you to destroy useless and toxic programs and defeat your persona, as illustrated in this cartoon. At the end, the princess and Felix part ways. The princess will close the demands portal and says that next time it will be Felix's dimension that suffers. What does the soul mean by this? Remember, this is an inner journey, and recall the phrase, as it is inside, so it is outside. Once you have completed the deconstruction of your persona, only then you are able to begin acting in the external world and bring truth, love, and wisdom to the rest of the world. When the princess asks Felix to stay, Felix replies that he has much work to do in his dimension. This refers to the work each of us must do in the external world once we heal the traumas and emotional wounds we carry within. Everyone enters the demands portal, but it does not activate because gold from one dimension cannot be transferred to another, and the scientists have taken gold with them. The wizards exit along with the gold. The princess tells Felix that even though gold is not passable through the demands portal, he will be the only one to carry gold from here. And the gold she's talking about is the golden heart, which Felix possesses, which represents the experiences and goodness cultivated when living from a state of truth, love, and wisdom. It's incredible how much hidden truth is packed into just an hour and 15 minutes of this animated film. While watching it, I couldn't believe how explicitly the path to the soul's salvation was depicted. But remember what I said at the beginning. Fairy tales are encrypted truth that cannot be understood by people who are personas. For them, this is just some cartoon that even has 4.6 rating on IMDb. However, if we consider the symbolism that most people fail to see, the rating it would be given is a solid 10. Let's summarize and see how this journey can be used for your own healing, for freeing your soul from your persona. In the first scene, we learn the entire journey our heroes go through takes place within ourselves. In the second scene, we are introduced to the defense mechanisms of our psyche, the exiles and protectors. The exile is the soul, while the protectors are the managers and firefighters, who prevent the soul from returning to the system because it is unable to process the emotions present in the system at the moment. In the third scene, we see how the soul becomes enslaved due to suppressed and unhealed traumas, toxic programs and beliefs. The persona takes the soul's place, and we realize the conscious is the last thing the soul leaves to the ego to guide it toward liberation. In the fourth scene, we meet the cultivated ego and the logical mind, which is unable to see conscious or understand the cultivated ego. In the fifth scene, the ego enters the unknown world, its subconscious, and begins the healing process there. In the sixth scene, we learn about the rules of the lower astral, where the law of inversion applies, and we are introduced to corrupted inner guide, which is under the influence of low vibrational entities for now. In the seventh scene, we come to an explanation of parallel dimensions. Now we know these are two worlds that exist simultaneously in the same space, on the same planet but on different level of existence. The eighth scene describes incarnations or cycles of suffering that the soul goes through because it lacks secret knowledge and a cultivated ego to free it from the cycle of suffering. The ninth scene shows us how the logical mind deals with trauma. It is not capable of resolving it, but only temporarily reduces it through rationalizations. In the 10th scene, we are introduced to the values upheld by low vibrational beings like the reptilians of the lower astral. We see the short-term pleasures and entertainment are the top of their priority list. The 11th scene tells us about the path, astral projection, and the obstacles we must overcome to reach the soul and master these skills. Taming thoughts, emotions, and delta state of sleep where consciousness is lost, and the vibrational state. In the 12th scene, we learn how the false god, the so-called demiurge or the persona, is created. In the final 13th scene, we learn three things. First, we must organize our identities, the conflicting parts of ourselves that sabotage our daily functioning. Second, we must release the crystallized emotions stored in our bodies and nervous system, melt them or process them through the system. And third, we learn the secret of the number 3, 6 and 9, which are truth, love and wisdom. And that is the secret formula to defeating persona. When we have all three, we can cultivate something called the golden heart. This is, believe it or not, the path to the soul's liberation. Completely extraordinary. But now we come to the explanation of the number 4 that I owe you. The number 4 appears multiple times through this animated film, and the author constantly draws our attention to it. Every time a radical transition from one dimension to another, from one level of existence to another needs to happen, the number 4 appears. Thus the number 4 is the number of transformation, of change, because we have 4 seasons, symbolizing transformation. It also represents discipline or transformation through discipline. We have the 4 foxes Felix must outsmart, the 4 buttons on the demands portal that the tier passes to transition to Felix's dimension. Again, the 4 buttons the scientist press to move to another dimension. The 4 mice from the hat and the 4 creatures that suck Felix in with their snores. The persona is part of us and we all have one. To deconstruct the persona, we must first possess knowledge about it and understand how it functions. Without this, we cannot work on its deconstruction. When we talk about persona, we've said it has managers, firefighters, toxic programs and beliefs. The so-called cylinders, as described in this cartoon. All of these arise because we ignore our thoughts and emotions, which later crystallize and wait to be transformed. To deconstruct the persona, it is not necessary to study psychology for years or attend therapy where you'll talk about your traumas. It's not necessary to view your emotional wounds from another perspective or to seek explanations for why certain things happen to you. What is necessary is to experience the emotions you've been keeping hidden in the far corners of your subconscious, to relive the events you've avoided because they contain an overwhelming emotional charge that, at the time, you couldn't process. If you want to learn how to release your emotions, and in doing so allow parts of your soul to return to your system effortlessly, and without adding additional learning, I recommend you go through Soul Athlete experience. This experience has allowed me and thousands of others to dive into the deepest parts of our subconscious, process emotional charges we've been carrying since childhood, and release them in just 1 hour of going through the Soul Athlete experience. Take a look if you want to master your emotions and cultivate your ego and emotional intelligence. The link is in the description. If you think the Soul Athlete experience is too expensive, but are interested in the topics I cover on this channel, then subscribe to the channel and like the video. I plan to explore and interpret hidden truths, philosophies and psychology in many cartoons, anime, books, movies, games and series every week, because I think many truths are hidden in ancient stories. We just need to uncover them. This is my first video on the channel, and what I want from this channel is to bring value and entertainment to its subscribers. But not just that, I also aim to provide concrete steps for solving everyday problems that inherently carry heavy and toxic thoughts and emotions. The result of working on this is the cultivation of emotional intelligence through the Soul Athlete experience, and the relief that comes after releasing emotional clutter. Emotional intelligence is a superpower in today's world. Whoever masters their emotions will master every aspect of their life. In the next video, we'll explore metaphysics in a popular anime and how you can apply those metaphysical loves to better understand the world around you and feel relief. Can you guess which anime it is based on the silhouette? Write your guess in the comments. See you in the next video.